the country whose title I've been so greatly privileged to bear during so much of my life and duty. With Catherine beside him, will, I know, continue to inspire and lead our national conversation.
The order did not arrive with shouting. It arrived in silence, sealed in royal authority, and carried through the palace like a verdict no one dared challenge. King Charles had made his decision. Queen Camilla's diamond brooch collection would be transferred to Catherine, Princess of Wales. In one stroke, jewels that symbolize standing, memory, and royal favor were moved away from Camilla and placed into Catherine's future. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles sat alone with the final page in front of him, and for a long moment, he did not touch the pen. He had signed orders before. He had carried duty through grief, scandal, and silence. But this was different, because the royal order, a written command from the monarch that directs how palace property, roles, or ceremonial duties must be handled, did not simply move diamonds from one secure place to another. It moved meaning. It moved favor. It moved the center of gravity inside the family. The king read the document twice, then lowered his hand toward the page with the slow weight of a man who knew that once the ink dried, no private apology could fully soften what he had done. Camilla received the news in a private sitting room, and the shock did not appear all at once. It passed through her in silence. First, her face hardened. Then her shoulders stilled. Then she asked whether Charles had signed it himself, and when the answer came back yes, the queen consort understood the true cruelty of the moment. She had not been called in. She had not been warned. She had not been given the small mercy of arguing before the decision became final. The diamond brooch collection, pieces worn not merely for beauty, but for rank, loyalty, public visibility, and access within the royal household, had been taken out of her hands and placed into Catherine's custody. Catherine did not yet know the full emotional cost of what was being handed to her, but the order had already placed her at the center of a storm. One quiet clause made the transfer even more devastating. She would decide when and how the collection appeared at future state events, formal occasions where royal figures represent the crown before dignitaries, leaders, and the nation. A senior aide noticed the missing detail that said everything. Charles had not summoned Camilla before signing. The monarch had chosen finality over discussion. William would soon be forced into the most difficult position of all. The transfer did not only lift Catherine higher, it left Camilla exposed, and before the palace could absorb what Charles had done, the people closest to the order had to face what it meant for them personally. Behind every royal jewel lies a story, but this collection carried something far heavier than diamonds. For Camilla, the brooches had become proof that she had survived years of judgment and finally stood inside the heart of the monarchy. For Catherine, they arrived not as a gift, but as a burden. And for Charles, the transfer became the most personal decision he had made since taking the throne. Catherine read the inventory list slowly, and every line seemed to pull her deeper into a role she had not asked to claim through someone else's pain. The future queen, the royal woman expected to stand beside William when he one day becomes king, understood why the collection mattered. These brooches would strengthen her public place at state events, because royal jewelry does not only decorate, it speaks. It tells the country who is being trusted, who is being prepared, and who is being moved toward the center of the crown. She paused over one diamond brooch marked for her first official use, and her fingers stayed there longer than expected. Honor was sitting in front of her. So was guilt. Camilla felt the same list like a sentence. The brooches had followed her through years of cold looks, whispered doubts, and careful appearances. To her, they were not simple ornaments. They were proof that the palace had finally allowed her to stand without apology. The queen consort, the wife of the king, given a public royal role beside him, had built part of her identity around being seen in those pieces. When she asked one aide whether Charles had personally approved every item, her voice dropped so low it barely carried. The aide did not answer quickly. That silence told her everything. The king had not only approved it, he had accepted what the decision would do to her. William learned something even more troubling before the day ended. The transfer had not been prepared overnight. The prince saw the dates, the quiet revisions, the careful notes, and realized the decision had roots deeper than one palace disagreement. Charles had kept a handwritten note beside the royal order, and that detail changed the air around the entire matter. The monarch was not acting from ceremony alone. He was answering a breach of trust. Someone had crossed a line long before the diamonds changed hands. Catherine closed the folder, but the unease remained. Camilla stood wounded, Charles stood firm, and William understood that the truth was buried in an earlier moment everyone had tried to forget. And when the palace looked backward, one ceremony stood out as the moment everything quietly broke. The palace would later trace the entire crisis back to one evening, the Windsor diplomatic reception. It had seemed controlled, polished, and perfectly royal. Yet behind the doors, a small decision became a wound. Camilla wore a diamond brooch that had been privately reserved for Catherine's first major future role, and Charles watched the reaction ripple through the room before anyone dared speak its meaning aloud. Catherine noticed it first, and for one sharp second, her smile almost faltered. The Windsor diplomatic reception, a formal royal gathering where the monarch welcomes foreign ambassadors and senior figures, was never just a social evening. It was a stage where every gesture carried meaning, and every jewel could become a message. That was why the brooch mattered. It had been quietly marked as a bridge between Charles's reign and Catherine's future beside William. It was meant to signal trust in the next chapter. Instead, Camilla wore it before its time, and the queen consort did so after private guidance had made the meaning clear. William saw the change in Catherine before anyone else did. She kept her face calm, because the Princess of Wales knew the room was watching. But when she turned away, the warmth left her expression, and the prince understood that something deeply personal had been touched. Camilla continued through the evening as if nothing had happened, yet she knew the brooch was not a random choice. She knew it had been reserved, and that knowledge turned a single piece of jewelry into a challenge no one could publicly name. Charles felt the insult land in silence. The king watched Catherine hold herself steady, then looked toward Camilla with a stillness that frightened the aides nearest to him. Palace restraint had been mistaken for permission. Quiet warnings had been mistaken for weakness. Later, in a private conversation recorded in a documented household account, a senior advisor confirmed what changed everything. Camilla had been warned before the reception. She had been told the brooch was being held for Catherine. That meant the moment could no longer be treated as misunderstanding. It had become deliberate. Charles carried that night with him. When the royal order was later signed, the monarch kept one handwritten note beside it, and the words were simple enough to cut through every excuse: the Windsor breach. That phrase proved the reception had become the point of no return. Catherine had been wounded. William had seen it. Camilla had crossed the line. And once the queen consort realized the transfer was tied to that one evening, she demanded to face Charles directly. The brooch had been worn for one evening, but the confrontation it created would burn far longer. Camilla did not ask for an audience. She walked into one. The door closed behind her, and for the first time since the order was signed, Charles had to face the woman most wounded by his decision. No aides softened the exchange. No secretary carried the blame. The queen consort stood before the monarch and demanded to know why a collection tied to her public dignity had been taken from her. Camilla gripped the back of a chair, and her voice carried the pain she had tried to hide from the rest of the palace. She asked Charles whether he meant to shame her. Not correct her, not guide her, shame her. The king did not answer at once, because the question struck him as both wife and monarch. A monarch is the ruling head of the crown, the person whose decisions carry official royal authority. But Charles knew this was not only about authority. It was about marriage, loyalty, and a woman who believed the palace had finally stopped measuring her against the past. Camilla saw his hesitation and understood that the decision had hurt him too, but not enough for him to undo it. Charles looked away before he spoke, and that small delay wounded her more than anger would have. He told Camilla the transfer was not a public demotion, but a correction of symbolic responsibility. The brooches had come to represent more than her survival. They now touched Catherine's future, William's place, and the public image of the next reign. The king reminded her that the Windsor diplomatic reception had changed everything. That ceremony, a formal royal gathering where the crown receives important diplomatic guests, had become proof, in his eyes, that personal desire had crossed into royal duty. Camilla had worn what had been reserved. She had ignored the warning. And Charles had decided that silence could no longer protect anyone. Camilla's face hardened when William's name entered the conversation. She asked how much the prince knew, and Charles did not deny that he had seen parts of the process. That answer shifted her pain into anger. If William knew, then Catherine knew more than she had admitted. If the future king had stood near the order, then the transfer was not only Charles's judgment. It felt like a family closing ranks around her. Camilla stepped back from the chair, wounded by the thought that the collection had been taken not in one signature, but through quiet agreement. Charles refused to reopen the order. He did not raise his voice. He did not soften the verdict. Camilla left the room wounded, but the machinery behind Charles's decision had already begun moving without her. The order looked like one monarch's decision, but its strength came from the people who knew how fragile royal symbols had become. Behind the sealed instructions stood legal custodians, household advisors, and one future king weighing every consequence. Yet the human center of the decision remained Charles, sitting alone as each advisor explained why reversing course would make the crown look weak. Charles listened without interrupting, but the silence around him grew heavier with every sentence. One advisor placed the sealed inventory before him and explained that the diamond brooches had been classified as ceremonial assets, meaning items used for public royal duty rather than private emotional ownership. That mattered, because the collection no longer represented only Camilla's place beside him. It now touched Catherine's future role, William's coming reign, and the monarchy's need to show a clear line of trust. If the order was reversed, the crown would not look merciful. It would look unsure. The king removed his glasses, pressed his fingers against his eyes, and let the words settle like stone. William stood carefully inside that pressure. The prince did not speak as a son looking for conflict, but as a future king trying to protect the woman who would one day stand beside him. He told Charles that Catherine could not inherit responsibility while being denied the symbols that responsibility required. The future queen would be expected to carry state moments, formal duties, and national attention with calm strength. If Camilla kept control of the brooches after the Windsor breach, then Catherine would appear elevated in title, but weakened in practice. William chose every word with restraint, yet the meaning was sharp. His wife could not be publicly prepared while privately undermined. Charles looked down at the inventory again, and the hidden truth became impossible to ignore. Several brooches had already been scheduled for Catherine's future appearances before Camilla wore the central piece at Windsor. The sealed inventory, a confidential palace list recording where royal items are kept and who may use them, proved the decision had been arranged with care, not revenge. The king understood why the advisors were firm. Allowing the queen consort to keep control would confuse the public message. It would leave two women appearing to represent the same future, and the crown could not afford that kind of uncertainty. William saw the exhaustion in his father's face, but he also saw the decision harden. Charles did not celebrate it. He accepted it. The machinery had spoken through law, duty, and fear of confusion. Power had spoken on paper, but the first true shock came when the collection itself began to leave Camilla's reach. The fallout began not with a speech, but with the sound of a drawer closing. A palace attendant opened the jewel cabinet, checked each label, and began removing the diamond brooches one by one. Camilla stood nearby, silent at first, then visibly shaken, as the collection that once confirmed her place was wrapped, logged, and prepared for Catherine. Nothing about the moment felt ceremonial. It felt like loss. Camilla watched the first case shut, and the small sound seemed to break something she had been holding together. She asked the attendant to stop for a moment, not loudly, not angrily, but with the low voice of someone trying not to fall apart in front of staff. The jewel cabinet, the secured palace storage where important royal pieces are kept, recorded, and released for official use, had once made her feel protected. Now it made her feel excluded. The brooches were being removed from her controlled access and prepared for Catherine's secure custody, meaning the Princess of Wales would now decide how the collection entered future royal life. That mattered, because every state appearance, portrait choice, and formal wardrobe note would now point toward Catherine's rise, not Camilla's survival. Catherine received the sealed cases later, but she did not open them at once. The honor was too heavy. The future queen understood that the transfer strengthened her public role, yet she also knew it had arrived through humiliation. She stood before the cases with still hands, aware that each brooch carried another woman's years of struggle. Palace aides had already begun updating appearance plans and formal records, because the collection would shape how Catherine appeared at future state events and official portraits. But she felt no triumph. She felt the strange ache of being elevated by someone else's loss. William noticed the problem before the room settled. One brooch was missing from the expected arrangement. The prince checked the list twice, then looked again at the empty space where the central Windsor piece should have been. It was the same brooch Camilla had worn at the diplomatic reception, the same piece that had turned private tension into royal consequence. Suddenly, the earlier breach did not feel finished. It felt alive. Whether the brooch had been misplaced, withheld, or deliberately separated, its absence turned the transfer from procedure into suspicion. Catherine understood what the missing piece could do. If Charles ordered an investigation, Camilla would be wounded again. If William pushed too hard, the family would split deeper. So Catherine made the quiet choice no one expected. She asked to meet Camilla privately, without the king, without aides, without protection. The collection had changed hands, but the wound behind it could only be confronted when Catherine and Camilla finally stood alone. For all the authority Charles carried, he could not speak for the two women at the center of the storm. Catherine asked for no audience, no witnesses, and no palace language to protect the moment. When Camilla entered the private room, the silence was heavier than anger. The future queen was not there to celebrate victory. She was there to understand what had truly been taken. Catherine stood with the sealed case nearby, and she did not touch it while Camilla watched. The private meeting, a conversation held away from aides, advisors, and official palace control, mattered because it stripped the crisis down to two women and one wound. No Charles, no William, no written order between them. Just the collection, the missing Windsor brooch, and the truth both had avoided. Catherine now held authority over the diamonds, but authority did not erase history. She knew Camilla had worn those pieces through years of judgment, cold acceptance, and careful public duty. She also knew that receiving them this way made victory feel like sorrow. Camilla entered guarded, but the queen consort changed when Catherine spoke first. The Princess of Wales told her she had never asked to receive the brooches through humiliation. She had never wanted another woman's place to be broken, so hers could look stronger. That sentence gave Camilla something she had not expected: dignity. For the first time since the order, she did not defend herself with anger. She admitted, in a recorded private conversation, later summarized in a household account, that losing the collection felt like losing proof that the palace had finally accepted her. The confession made her pain human, not political. It was not only about diamonds, it was about belonging. Catherine listened, but she did not forget the missing piece. Camilla finally revealed the truth. She had kept the Windsor brooch aside, not to steal it, not to start another fight, but because she could not bear to see that one brooch become the symbol of her replacement. The queen consort said the piece had become too painful to surrender with the others. Catherine could have accused her. She could have called Charles. She could have let William turn the absence into another breach. Instead, she chose restraint. She asked only that the brooch be returned privately, so the transfer could end without another public wound. Camilla agreed, and something in the room shifted. The brooch would return. The collection would remain with Catherine. The order would stand. But the cruelty of the moment had softened into a painful kind of understanding. Inside the palace, the crisis found its quiet turning point. Outside the gates, the country was only beginning to react. By morning, the palace could no longer contain the story. One front page captured the mood with brutal simplicity. A photograph of Catherine, arriving at a formal engagement beside the headline, "Diamonds Change Hands." Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace, some praising Charles's decision as protection of the future, others seeing Camilla's loss as a public rebuke. The private wound had become a national image. Catherine saw the headline before leaving for her engagement, and her hand tightened around the folded paper. The phrase was sharp because it made a painful transfer look like a victory parade. A formal engagement, an official royal appearance made on behalf of the crown, usually allowed her to focus on duty, service, and calm public connection. But now every step carried another meaning. People would not only look at her face, they would look for diamonds. They would ask whether she had risen because Camilla had fallen. Catherine quietly folded the front page and placed it aside, knowing her new authority over the collection now came with public controversy. Camilla watched the morning broadcast in silence, and one sentence cut deeper than the rest. A presenter called the transfer the clearest sign yet of Catherine's rise, and the queen consort's face tightened at the word rise. To Camilla, that word carried its shadow. If Catherine was rising, then someone had to be seen as sinking. Buckingham Palace, the monarch's main working palace and one of the strongest public symbols of royal authority, had become the gathering point for the debate. Outside its gates, royal watchers argued over whether Charles had protected the future or punished his wife. Some held signs praising Catherine's dignity, others spoke softly about Camilla's humiliation. William understood the danger faster than most. The prince told Catherine she had to appear calm and dignified, because even one strained expression could turn the transfer into a visible power struggle. He knew the public wanted a simple story. One woman victorious, one woman wounded, one king choosing sides. But the truth was harder. Palace communication teams prepared a statement emphasizing continuity, meaning the smooth passing of responsibility from one royal chapter to the next. Yet even the cleanest language could not hide the emotional truth. Camilla had lost something that helped define her. Catherine had gained something that now carried pain. Charles watched the reaction build, and the king knew silence would no longer be enough. The private return of the Windsor brooch had softened the wound inside the palace, but outside, the nation had already judged the image. The monarch needed one final gesture, not to erase the scandal, but to give it meaning. The world had judged the image, but only Charles could give the moment its final meaning. In the end, the brooches were never only about diamonds. They were about who the monarchy believed could carry its future without bending under the weight of its past. Charles's order wounded Camilla, elevated Catherine, and forced the family to admit what silence had hidden for too long. Symbols matter because people pour their pride, pain, and hope into them. This transfer became the verdict. Charles met Camilla privately one last time after the public reaction, and the silence between them carried everything the palace statement could not say. He told her the order was not meant to erase her. He told her her place beside him remained. But the king also made clear that he could not undo what had been done. Royal continuity, the steady passing of duty, symbols, and public trust from one generation to the next, now required certainty. The collection would remain with Catherine, and the palace would formally recognize her custody as part of the monarchy's future. Camilla listened without interrupting. She had fought for acceptance for years, and now she had to accept a different kind of truth. She was still there, but the symbols had moved on. Catherine opened the returned Windsor brooch case later, and her hand paused before touching it. The future queen understood that the piece no longer carried only beauty. It carried the night of the breach, the pain of the transfer, and the quiet mercy of its private return. Charles's decision had become a defining act of his reign, not because it removed jewels from Camilla, but because it clarified where the crown was going. The monarch had chosen direction over comfort. He had chosen a future that could be seen clearly, even if that clarity hurt the people closest to him. William stood beside Catherine at a later formal moment as she wore one of the transferred brooches. and the message was impossible to miss. The prince did not need to explain it. His presence said the family had accepted the new order. Camilla attended the same event without the collection, dignified but visibly changed, carrying herself with the strength of someone who had lost a symbol, but not her name. The queen consort's place remained, yet her old defense had disappeared. The verdict was final. The monarchy chose continuity over comfort, Catherine over confusion, and the future over a fragile peace that could no longer hold. And with that final choice, the diamond brooches stopped being Camilla's defense and became Catherine's inheritance, not as decoration, but as the monarchy's unmistakable promise of what comes next. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.